Welcome, everybody. This is People for Liberty, Liberty Lunch Hour, and we are doing a special show because this week is Boat Safety Week. Now, a lot of people really enjoy spending time out on boats. They are tools. They are methods of transport. They are things that we use that can be incredibly pleasurable, but there is an element of danger to them. And so we're going to talk about boat safety, and I want us to take it seriously. But I also want to talk about the fact that as we have a tongue-in-cheek look at a lot of the stuff that's going on, please remember that I am advocating. In fact, I meant to bring a PFD and wear it during the show, and I completely spaced it. But maybe I'll go get one in a second. But please be serious about boat safety. And I want to qualify, too, I am not an expert on boat safety. I'll give you a little bit of my boating background. I grew up in Galveston, Texas, which is an island. I spent my summers in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, which borders both Buzzards Bay and Vineyard Sound in the Atlantic Ocean. I raced sailboats competitively for 8 years. I have been on the water a lot. I did have my captain's license, but I would not consider myself an expert in boat safety. And there are a lot of people who, have various levels of expertise. And we have one person who was a presidential candidate in 2020 and is truly, in my opinion, an expert. I'm going to bring him in right now. My good friend, Ken Armstrong. Ken, welcome to Liberty Lunch Power Hour.
And it's so good to see you. I've been missing you, my friend.
Well, I appreciate it. I feel the same way. Obviously, the saddest thing about the 2020 campaign was that we didn't elect a libertarian president. But the second saddest thing was that I made all these friends that I would see at all these events because we were doing them regularly, and then it's over. And now we don't see each other in person. And then we had the pandemic as well.
I was in Maryland in, what would that have been, early May or something like that of 2020. And we went up to New York for some business. And that's when we got word from a friend of ours, a libertarian friend who's a New York City cop, that they were getting ready to shut down the world, and we had to scramble, and that's when we didn't know that everything was going to shut down. So the last time I saw you in Maryland, that was it.
Yeah, right. And that was one of those things that it was a scenario where, ended up being for the national convention. I had to do the technical thing, so I had to be in front of a computer at home. I didn't get to see anybody there. And so I am very excited for the world to reopen. I actually am going to the Florida convention in June 11th. I'm going to the Delaware convention next week. I am excited to get back out there and meet libertarians. And so when we talk about Florida, it's a great talk into boat safety because Florida is one of those states with an enormous coastline. Although there's actually a great trivia question that, and I don't know if this is true anymore, but we used to play trivia. We got this question wrong. The state with the most registered boats is Michigan. Part of it is that Michigan requires you to register everything, but Michigan also has an enormous coastline. So I'm going to play a little video that is a beginning of our boat safety conversation. We pop this up, and you may have seen this one. It is a classic example of what can go wrong when you're on a boat and people don't take it seriously. And one of the things I like to notice here is the captain, and I use the term loosely, and where he is with the throttle. He realizes there's a little problem there. He's going to slow down. Oh, no, it's too late. So that is an example of how things can really go wrong. And we're tying this into what we were talking about in terms of the first issue for libertarians and boat safety. And one of the things that is an important thing to talk about, I just want to once more give our disclaimer that although we are talking about boat safety in a casual way, it's not a joke. Ken and I will both agree that people should definitely take the water seriously. So with that being said, let's talk about the first thing that's on our list. All the guns. So there's been an epidemic of libertarians losing their guns out at sea. And obviously this ties into, some people are worried about, the fact that if there were a registration of all guns, or if gun sales were known, somebody might potentially be able to track down and see where you have your guns. So that first video showed people racing along at a speed that was way too fast for the sea conditions. And when that happens, you can absolutely not just lose your guns, but everything else that's not secured on a boat. And so one of the things that I learned very quickly in my training, and I thought I'd ask you about it too, is the importance of making everything, as I'm going to use a nautical word, fast.
I knew you were going to say fast. Exactly right. You don't want gear adrift. That's what we call it in the sea services. Gear adrift is anything that can move around on deck.
And obviously, that would include guns. So if you have guns with you and you're out at sea, you want to make sure that they are fast. Now, I'm a person who, my level of gun safety usually means that it's in a safe or on my body in a holster. I like the 3-point holsters, so that it's not coming out. Somebody can't accidentally take it out. It's not going to fall out of my holster, anything like that. For sure, if you're out at sea, you don't want to have a rifle sitting somewhere on a table or something like that, whether we're loaded or not. And, I should have pulled the Jaws clip, because that's probably the best usage of a rifle off of a boat. So to that end, when we talk about having things fast, one of the important things about boat safety is recognizing that you can get into bad weather and not see it coming. And I got a story, and I bet you got a story about that, Ken.
Yeah, well, I do. I have lots of stories, but I want to say, there are two things that libertarians absolutely love. One is their guns, and the other is their herbal pleasure. But the only thing that we love more than our guns and our herbal pleasure is going out into deep places in the ocean with our guns and our and Dan, you and I, how many times we've been out deep sea fishing together? Dozens of times. And Pete Yapel and all kinds. I go out deep sea fishing with my libertarian friends, and you got to take your guns and your herb with you. It's just it's just the way it is. And so I've done some homework. And all of these libertarians that have lost our guns, do you know we've lost them all at roughly the same place?
I was not aware of that.
This is a fascinating little factoid for people. And so I want you to, folks, write this down. 47.74 north, 122.42 west. That's where you lost your gun. You may not remember it, but that's where you were when you lost your gun. And here's the sad thing about that.
Yeah.
You're right over the Mariana Trench.
Oh, so deep.
Deepest place on the planet. 36,000 feet, almost 7 miles deep. There's no way we'll ever find our beloved guns in the Mariana Trench. And I'm just heartbroken about it.
It actually raises a great point. So, I mentioned the fact that I spent my summers in Woods Hole, where the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute maintains Alvin, which I believe is still the submarine that has the record for the deepest dive. And, actually it ties into a perfect example of everybody loses their guns, because at one point in time, the United States lost two nuclear missiles. They fell off of an airplane, and they had to go retrieve them using the Alvin because it was so deep. But Mariana Trench, that's too deep even for the Alvin. So if you lose your guns there, you can't even ask Hui to go get them back.
But, being the good, responsible citizen that I am, I will be happy to give that information to the government anytime they're looking for it. This is where I lost my guns. And not only that, when you find them, keep them.
That's a fair enough assessment. I think that, and the interesting thing too is that, that the Mariana Trench, there's so much fascinating stuff. It's a great place to go if you're a tourist. So I understand everybody being attracted to go there. There's life forms at the bottom of the trench that don't exist anywhere else. It's just a fascinating part of the ocean. So we're here urging you that if you go to the Mariana Trench, please make your guns fast or have them secure upon your body. And I will throw in another thing that, so I mentioned I have a lot of experience at sea. I also was on a swim team in high school. I wear a PFD when I'm out. I have one that's very comfortable to wear. It was worth the investment, but it's one of those things that some places have laws that you should wear them. Some places don't. I would recommend everybody wear a PFD because you never know what's going to happen.
All kidding aside, as a former Coast Guard officer, almost every fatality that we recovered, they weren't wearing a flotation device. I can't joke about that. That's serious stuff.
Yep, I agree with it. And actually,
wear your PFD.
I appreciate you translating because I keep saying PFD, but PFD means personal flotation device. And a lot of people think they're the old orange life jackets. That's PFD 1. There are 3 different classifications, and 3 is the jacket, and you can get remarkably comfortable ones. And I say this as a person whose my waistline has sadly expanded. However, my jacket, life jacket that I wear, I can still wear comfortably. It doesn't impact my movement, anything like that. It's just an easy thing to do. It does impact your ability to suntan your navel. Okay, that's a small price to pay for potential safety.
When we get to a certain age, that's not a thing anymore anyway. That's exactly. Like, I don't wear Speedos and I don't suntan my navel anymore.
Exactly. If I could see my navel, I might be a little more concerned about it, but in this case, I'm not. So let's pop on to, we caught up with the idea that even the military has lost weapons at sea. And we talked, I can't believe I didn't think of putting this slide in there about the Alvin and the nuclear missiles that were lost. And then actually the Russians lost a submarine entirely that ended up having to be recovered. That's in the 60s? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, that was in the 60s, yeah.
And if you believe what people say, the Americans actually recovered the Russian submarine because it was too deep for the Russians to get to, but we were able to figure it out.
It was either the Glomar Explorer or the Glomar Coral Sea, which we can now say,
yep,
from knowledge that those were CIA platforms. They used to think they were cable laying ships.
They thought, oh, Glomar, yeah, that's a really conciliatory name. Nobody will figure out.
Glomar, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so. However, a story that people probably aren't aware of, and we're going to talk about this first, talking about the fact that, everybody loses weapons at sea, even the U.S. government. The USS Hornet was ordered to steam into the eye of a typhoon. This is during World War II. And for those of you who aren't aware, we look back at what's happened during the pandemic and what Americans were able to do. Naval construction during World War II it could be a study unto itself. In this case, the Hornet class, the United States had the plans for them in 1940 as an aircraft carrier, and they had them at sea in 1942. That could never happen. Well, probably could happen today if the government weren't getting in the way, but it was an astonishing accomplishment. So the Hornet was out in not quite the South China Sea, but in the Southwest Pacific Ocean, around the Philippines, and they were ordered to steer into a typhoon because the typhoon was in between where they were supposed to go. The admiral gave them directions. The captains asked if they could put aside several requests, but unfortunately they were denied. And I want to show people what the boat looked like afterwards, because it's important that people understand what the force of the water can do. Let me share this screen. I know it's behind me, but is that flashing for you? It's flashing for me.
Yeah, it is.
Let's stop that.
But we can get yeah. We can actually see that behind you pretty well, even with your Empire.
There we go. I fixed it.
There we go.
My Darth Vader chair.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is pretty astonishing. This was the flight deck and the entire front part of the flight deck was ripped off by a typhoon. And in fact, 2 carriers suffered the same damage. And then another amazing one, let me find this quickly. The
That
USS
deck, by the way, that's designed to handle the launch force of an aircraft. That's not a weak place on the ship.
No, definitely. And in fact, well, and this goes to, I don't want to twist my Navy friends too much, but the after that, let me just go back to that picture, because after that happened, they were ordered to attempt to take planes off from there anyway. And so obviously the first plane that they tried to launch went into the ocean. Exactly. And they prepared for it. So the pilot was wearing his PFD and was ready to eject right away. In the end, given their own time to figure it out, the people on the boat figured out they could take the planes off the back of the runway. Although they didn't have the catapults to launch them, but if they brought them down to the end and they gave them enough space and they reversed into the wind, everything worked right. So they were able to get all the planes off and send them to other carriers. And then these ships ended up going to Australia for refitting. The Pittsburgh, this picture here, let me blow that up. I don't think it's going to get much bigger, but if people look down here, you can see the bow is ripped off of this boat. And that also happened by the typhoon. And so, first of all, I do want to make a quick comment about naval engineers and the fact that they made these boats so that they could still sail. And, like these are 16-inch guns on the front of this boat. This is not a casual sailing craft. They made it so that it could still sail in the ocean with the bow missing. And that's an impressive thing, and not something I would ever think about trying about. But talk about 2 things with that. First of all, we talked about the importance of people and and being safe at sea. Anybody can lose weapons because if we just seen the U.S. Navy, who they got a lot of experience at sea, and they lost 146 aircraft carriers during that typhoon, which is a pretty astonishing number of things to lose. I mean, if you take the value of all the guns that libertarians have lost at sea, it's not going to add up to 146 aircraft. So in one day, the Navy has lost more than we ever lost. And this is going to lead us into a quick story about storms. I'm going to let you go first, Ken, because I bet you've got a better storm story than I do.
Well, lots of storm stories, as a matter of fact, and typhoons down in Guam and all kinds of things. But talking about the force of the ocean, I had a nephew who sailed in the Enterprise, big aircraft carrier, enormous aircraft carrier, down around Cape Horn, and it's always stormy down there. It's a violent sea down there.
Yeah,
and the force of the storm actually ripped a mega $1 million, $10 million or more missile launcher off of the side of the ship, more than 70 feet above the waterline. So
wow.
7 stories high, ripped this enormous missile launcher off the side of the ship. So, these are professionals, and I tons of respect. The CEO of that ship is a rear admiral in the Navy. The guy has got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and even he gets fooled by how powerful the ocean can be.
Well, and it's a great thing too, because the ocean can seem like you're ready to go. You know what's happening in the ocean, and then all of a sudden, there's a phenomenon called a rogue wave.
Yeah.
And I'm going to play a quick video of a rogue wave. So this is on a beach in California. People just hanging out there. And then out of nowhere, nobody's expecting, this giant wave comes in, and we're going to get to see it again in slow motion.
And those are caused off of the coast of California. You get seismic activity. You get all kinds of things. You don't know those are coming.
Right. And, when we talk about boat safety, that's certainly a great thing to talk about, is that you don't, exactly what Ken said, you don't know exactly what's going to be happening on a boat and the danger that's going to be involved in that. So I'm going to tell my quick boat story. We were sailing in Long Island Sound. I was with my uncle, and he had decided that it would be a great idea to take me, my brother, and his sons on a week-long sailing trip. Now, he actually was not a particularly experienced sailor. He was, however, a Marine, which he thought meant he knew everything about boats. So, so we get out there, but he did bring me along because at that point in time, I'd been racing. I certainly knew my way around a sailboat really well. But what I didn't know was, because I'd been racing, what the ocean is like, deep sea, stuff like that. And so we were in the Sound, and we had the radio on, and a weather alert came on, and it said, severe thunderstorms forecast. And then, to their wisdom, and I think it's NOAA who broadcasts the emergency weather channel stuff, they said, you might think you know what a severe thunderstorm is, but you don't. And they talked about how it could get bad. And we could see off in the distance these clouds. And I thought, it's not that bad. A little bit of rain. We're not going to be that bad. Well, all of a sudden, we were caught in this amazing downpour. Visibility dropped down to about 20 feet. And my uncle sent my brother and his sons down below. And I was getting ready to go too. And I'm like, he's like, no, today you're a man. You're on deck with me. So we get the sail down pretty quickly. And then, there's something about being caught in a storm like that. If you don't have the formal training, you forget things. You're not prepared to react. And so one of the things that happened right away was, I knew we were in the middle of Long Island Sound. I had a rough idea of our position, but I'd never really had to navigate on instruments alone. And so at one point in time, we're sitting there and we get the motor going, and we're going along at what I think is a safe speed. And I'm like, we've been going this way for 20 minutes. I think we should turn around and head the other way. He's like, how do you know what the other way is? I'm like, yeah, I guess. And I'm like, oh, wait, we've got a compass. We can navigate using the compass. Keep the waves astern or in the bow. And so we're doing that. And then I remembered from one of my safety classes that when visibility is that low and we didn't have great running lights or anything like that, you're supposed to sound your horn once every minute. I'm like, you know what? What the heck? Let's do that. And so the very first time we get up, I get out the horn and I sound it. 20 seconds later, we hear another horn sound. I'm like, wow, there's somebody else out here. So one of those things that training, taking the sea seriously, stuff like that, it always pays off. And I can tell you that since then, if I've heard that a storm is coming, I will go to shore.
Yeah,
that's my ship safety.
Absolutely. Follow the advisories, put your radio on the Marine band, listen to the warnings that are coming. Absolutely. I know we got our libertarian friends. The best government is no government at all. But there are some great agencies out there. One of them is the Coast Guard Auxiliary, which is a bunch of volunteers. This is so libertarian it'd drive you crazy. 26,000 volunteers in more than 800 little units around the country. And they're totally volunteer, and they monitor what's going on, and they warn people. They go out to the marinas and they say, there's a storm warning today or whatever. It's fabulous. Pay attention to those people.
Yeah, I think that's a critical thing about it. And actually, the Coast Guard Auxiliary is one of those things that if you have a desire, if we want to show that voluntarism works, they need everybody. So you might think to yourself, oh, I can't do anything to help. No, there's always a position for you to help. Sometimes, it's one of the most amazing things is, so Woods Hole, there's a big Coast Guard, well, not a big Coast Guard, but there's a pretty big Coast Guard station there.
Yeah.
And at various points in time, they get called out on emergency calls for fishermen lost at sea. And then just north of where I lived in Beverly, is Gloucester, Massachusetts. And Gloucester is an incredible shipping town, but they actually have this amazing monument too, to all the Gloucester fishermen who've been lost at sea. And what's really interesting about it is they have it by year, and you see how much better we've gotten in terms of safety, and you see how much better that that we've gotten in terms of response and being able to save people. And obviously, the Gloucester has the most famous fishing story out there right now in the perfect storm. But the Coast Guard Auxiliary in Woods Hole always put on things, because when the ships go out for a long haul, for those sailors, I mean, they're just kids. That's not the happiest time in their life. And one of the things that the auxiliary would do is say, you know what, when you guys come back, we're just going to have a cookout for you. You guys come, we're going to say, welcome back, sailor, that sort of thing. We're glad that you made it back safely, all that sort of thing. And it's astonishing how meaningful that was to the people who were serving on the ships. And yeah, and just, you wouldn't think, oh, I can help out the Coast Guard Auxiliary, but if you can run a grill, you can help out.
And as you said, there's so many roles to be taken: radio operators, people who communicate by computer, all kinds of people. But the auxiliary donates, and again, this is not a military service. This is a volunteer civilian service, exactly what libertarians want to see happen. And they donate like 4 million hours a year to boating safety education, to voluntary, I underline that word 3 times, yep, voluntary inspections of your boats for, make sure that you know what you're doing, and you know how to properly vent your bilges. The very first fatality that I responded on in the Coast Guard was somebody who didn't vent the bilge gases before they started up when they were out in the Catalina Channel. So the auxiliary, they go out and they save lives on their own dime with their own personal vessels. They go out and they've saved, I don't even know how many lives over the years. This is the libertarian branch of the United States government, for real.
And you raise a great point on that, because one of the other things that's really important that they do is there is there is sort of a code of the sea that if you hear somebody else is in trouble and you know where they are and you know that you can make a difference, people go and render help, render aid essentially as quickly as they can. Now, it's always a question of, what are you capable of doing? What is your boat outfitted to doing? One of the reasons why it's always a good idea to carry a couple extra life jackets on board, because you never know when you might want to have to throw them out there. But also just a little bit of training. And the Coast Guard Auxiliary, I've seen them do that as well, is how would you respond to an emergency? You're not the Coast Guard, but how would you respond? And they did this nice little, they had a sort of bulletin board and stuff like that, and talk about a couple of things that are really important, because especially in a relatively heavily trafficked area, the first responder is not going to be the Coast Guard. The first responder is going to be somebody else who's out there in a boat. And a couple of critical things, don't run anybody over. That's something that, if you're not cognizant of it, it's a really easy mistake to make.
If somebody's in the water, shut down. I can't tell you how many times people have backed over somebody in the water. It's horrible. I lost a really good friend to an accident like that, where he was in the water and somebody drove too close to another boat because he was just out there swimming, and just amazing. Yeah. There's no reason to get close to any place there could be a person with your motor running. So great talk about the Coast Guard Auxiliary. Let's talk a little bit about what I've got up here. International waters, territorial waters. Let me pop myself up full screen. International waters, territorial waters. And so I don't remember everything, but I remember when the U.S. expanded its fishing waters from 12 miles to 200 miles. And it was an interesting thing, because my uncle was in the Coast Guard at the time, and he was stationed down at Key West, where there's a big Coast Guard station. And one of the things that they talked about was, well, what does this mean for Cuba, who's well within our 200-mile territorial waters?
And what's really interesting about it is I didn't realize then, I do realize it now, the United States claims that 200 miles also off of Guantanamo. And so you can actually go down, and if you're within 200 miles, and
It's a kind of a cone-shaped thing off of Gitmo, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously there's methods for resolving this, but it actually, you probably know the story better than me. There's a point in time at which Canada and the United States have had warships facing off over this 200-mile border, this 200-mile fishing zone.
Well, yeah, I mean, ironically, where I'm sitting right now, straight ahead out the window, I can see Canada from here. I can see Vancouver Island, Victoria, Canada. So I can see Canada from here. This is much like in Alaska, where you have that strait that's 52 miles wide.
Right.
And that's another place where there's been conflict. When we expanded the contiguous zone in 1976, we said, okay, our territorial seas include out to this limit. And the purpose of it, by the way, all laws are based on a good idea that's gone bad.
Right.
The purpose of it was because we had foreign ships, predominantly Soviet ships, disguised as fishing boats coming into our water and potentially doing dangerous things. 9/11 wasn't the first time that somebody tried to hurt us.
Right.
So we were trying to do a smart thing and say, okay, by virtue of claiming fisheries out to 250 miles, we'll say that's our contiguous zone and you can't come in. But yeah, right now I'm looking at Canada just a few miles from me. How do we manage that? And it has caused conflict.
And it's one of those things that it's arbitrary because it's 200 miles for fishing, but my understanding is that it's 3 miles for gambling. And so I can tell you that in Boston, we have a thing, and I'm guessing that Boston isn't unique in using this name of the booze cruise. However, they take a pretty big boat that is super fast, over 3 miles, to get you out to sea, where they then open up casino tables and roulette and all sorts of gambling things. And then you get to gamble for like 6 hours, and then they bring you home. And I've always thought that's a pretty fine distinction that, you could be busted for running you can't be arrested for running bingo, even though that's also gambling, but you can be arrested for running a card game at your local church that's in the city of Boston. But if your church takes a boat 3 miles offshore, they can gamble all they want. And so there's a lot of laws about that, things that are illegal inside of the United States. But if you just go outside, you can do it. Actually, I don't know if this is true or not. I guess probably consuming drugs is legal in international waters. Do you know, is that 3 miles? Is it?
That's an interesting question. And I don't honestly know the answer, because most of my time out beyond that has been on a naval ship of one country or another, and
Right.
They discourage you from using drugs on naval ships.
Sure, that makes sense. They test you.
That's a good question. I think you're probably right. I think that once you get out past probably the 3 mile limit, and there are actually several. There's 3, there's 7, depending on different activities and state laws. So you have different limits, but once you get out past that limit, you can probably do anything you want.
Our good friend Dan Berman says he's going to buy a boat and grow weed out there. What's interesting about it, that's one thing, but there's actually probably a really good business opportunity of, and this is an interesting thing too, because I wasn't planning on talking about this, but labor out at sea is an interesting question as well. But you could bring a boat out there that was essentially a party boat and then ferry people back and forth from, my favorite example is Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Massachusetts, where cannabis is legal, New Hampshire, where it's not, even though it's the live-free state. But you know what? Just take a boat out there, sail out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and get on a 3 mile boat outside of the limit and There you go.
You know, I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about Coast Guard seizures right now, and I don't want to get into all the details, sure. But I was the administrator of what we now call the war on drugs. You know, I was one of the top architects of that back in the 80s. I apologize. You know, it's not a good thing, but I was doing a job that I thought was important at the time.
Sure.
But we seize all kinds of drugs out in international waters. And the way we do that, something you and I were talking about in the green room, is every vessel has a port of registry. And if you have a boat that's flying an American flag, you are subject to the American government. If you're flying a Liberian or a Panamanian or a British flag or whatever, you're subject to the laws of that country.
Right.
And what the Coast Guard will do when they're trying to seize a vessel, they go out there and they see a vessel and they see it's flying a Panamanian flag. They got to speed dial to the Panamanian embassy. They call up the embassy and they ask for permission to seize. So, much as, it's I think a good idea to challenge the laws, and particularly if you just floated your own personal island out there and grew and did whatever, I think they'd have a hard time taking action against you. But there's also a thing called stateless vessels. If you don't have a registry apparent, then our government, by international maritime law, gets to call you stateless, and they can seize you according to American law. I'll tell you what, if you think statism is big in downtown New York or downtown Chicago, statism is huge at sea. There's an international law of the sea. There's the International Maritime Organization. There's The Hague. You know, we've got all of these, and governments. I put a plural on that, right, with a little irony, because the rule Britannia used to be the thing. Britannia rules the seas. Yep. The United States rules the seas now by controlling the International Maritime Organization.
Well, and it's fascinating because most people got a close-up look at some of that when the Evergreen blocked the Suez Canal, and a lot of maritime law came into play there. And in fact, I believe that Egypt seized the boat, and that they still have it because they were claiming that damages for blocking the canal.
They get salvage rights, and did you see how many boxes were on that deck?
Exactly. Well, and it was a fascinating thing in a number of different ways. One of them too was that you sort of saw somebody almost immediately said, "Look, start taking the containers off." Who knows? In fact, it might have been you who said that, Ken. I think it was right. And so that's funny. I like it when I quote people.
Raise the water line. Get the damn weight off the deck.
Yeah, it's a simple thing to do. And now it is a complicated thing to unload those boats.
It would be. Yeah.
But considering how much money they spent, they could have planned out how to do it. They could have flown in helicopters. You have, the Israeli Army and Air Force, the Egyptian Army and Air Force, and the U.S. has, 2 carrier groups in the area that certainly have
a bunch of Erickson air cranes traveling in that area all the time. And those Erickson air cranes have amazing lift capability. They could have done it. Yeah.
Yep. But whatever. No, they didn't want any help. They sent that one bulldozer out there to struggle away at shifting the canal.
Yeah. Digging in the dirt out by the bow of the ship. That was really helpful.
It was, but again, that's another sort of example. And maybe we should talk quickly about one of the laws of the sea that libertarians might run afoul of. So a lot of people probably are familiar with the right-of-way laws. And as a perfect example, a ship at sail always has a right-of-way over a motorboat. But we also refer to right-of-weight, which is that if you're a sailboat and you get in the way of a big boat that can't stop, that's really your own fault. You can't, don't expect to say, lured boat heading up, and to see a big motor vessel give you way at that point in time. So go ahead.
In that regard, in maritime law, there is a rule called the General Prudential Rule, which is kind of one of the most cool libertarian laws on the books anywhere. It says, doesn't matter what the law says, don't screw people up.
It's a pretty simple thing. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. Don't screw with them out of the ocean because it's incredibly dangerous. So those are great overviews. We talked a little bit about international borders. We should at least briefly touch on the Jones Act, which is one of the things that people think is just the stupidest law that still exists. And that's in a world of some really stupid laws. So can you explain to us briefly what the Jones Act is?
So, and again, this is an example of something that was very well intentioned. The purpose of it is, vessels are registered in ports where they have rules and regulations about the safety of the ship, the safety of the crew, the documenting of the crew, and all of that. And so what was happening was more and more ships were being registered in Panama and Liberia and places like that that have practically no standards at all. And those places are just happy to take your fees for registering you. And there was a lot of loss of life because of that. So the United States said, you cannot travel between two ports in the United States on a ship that's registered outside of the United States. Seemed like a pretty logical thing to do. That way, the coastwise shipping in the United States, and this has been extended to include aircraft since then, but the coastwise shipping in the United States supposedly would be done by ships that are registered in the United States. That's why, by the way, if you get on Carnival Cruise, there's only certain places you can get on: San Diego, Miami,
right.
And the reason is, if you'll notice, the very next port is outside the United States: Mexico, Canada, the Bahamas, wherever. They immediately head for a port outside the United States so that they're not in violation of the Jones Act. Then they can go wherever they want to go. But you can't take a Carnival ship from San Francisco to Honolulu because that would violate the Jones Act.
And that's a great thing. I went on a cruise out of Hawaii, and we had to go a day and a half south to Kiribati, which is one of my. At one point in time, I had thought I wanted to live on a tropical island, like a really deserted island. Some person who likes privacy, something like that. When I got to Kiribati, and I saw, these people live in essentially paradise. Beautiful weather. The atoll that they're in, when the tide goes out, there are fish just trapped in the water. So they just walk out into the water and pick up the fish that they want to eat that day. Vegetables, coconuts grow, everything like that. It was paradise. And yet they've been there for about 1,000 years, and nobody's done anything except for build these simple little huts. There's no industry there or anything like that. And I don't know if it means that living in paradise makes you crushes your ambition or whatever it was, but I realized I may not be temperamentally suited for paradise. So that was my that was my wake up. But our cruise ship had to sail to Kiribati before it could come back to Hawaii, even though it started in Hawaii and it left in Hawaii. There was a reason we had to go to Kiribati. And then the other thing about it that was really frustrating was Hawaii is one of 3 states in which, if your port of origin, your port of destination is inside the United States, there's no gambling on board. And so I have a mathematician's weakness. I love to gamble. And I was very unhappy that there were these beautiful casino on board that we weren't able to use because the boat started in Hawaii and left in Hawaii. I will say, though, that, and you lived in Hawaii for quite a while, right, Ken?
I did, for a decade, yeah.
There is I had resisted going to Hawaii for a long time because I thought everybody goes to Hawaii. It's so trite. And my wife's like, let's just go for our honeymoon and, we'll do this island cruise so we get to see all the islands. Hawaii is unbelievable. It is unbelievably beautiful.
Like you, my first time, I was in the military at the time. I didn't want to go. I happened to have a specialty that they needed over there for an exercise that was going on. And I got my arm twisted, and I went, and I was, I don't like touristy places. I don't like crowded places. So I really didn't want to go. I wasn't even out of the airport yet, and I was in love with Hawaii. So it's a special place. And not only that, it's the birthplace of my wife, Dawn, who many of our viewers have met Dawn during our campaign.
Absolutely.
She is by far my better half. It's like Spike and Tasha, it's Dawn and Ken. She's much better.
There is definitely a theme of libertarian men marrying above themselves.
Yep.
And no question about it. Every time I've gotten a chance to chat with Dawn, it's been fantastic. Hawaii is one of those really special places. But as we I want to come around and go full circle, we talk a little bit about things that can be done internationally. We've given out that, I believe, $1 million business idea of instead of booze cruises, having cannabis cruises where you could meet another boat at sea. Oh, and that's, I did want to talk about that interestingly, because there's a big thing happening in my former home state of Texas, where there's a tremendous shrimping population that sails out of Brownsville, which is the southernmost port, I believe, in the United States, in the contiguous United States. And it used to be populated by people coming over the border because the work is brutal. You are essentially sitting on the deck with shelling shrimp for hours. And were not Americans willing to do that work for a long time. And so what they would do is they would go out to sea, and then boats would come from Mexico with laborers on them, and they would come on board, and then they would do the work. So Texas passed a law saying that would be illegal, and that they couldn't do that anymore. It lasted for 3 months. And what they found out is that, first of all, it's probably illegal anyway, because there aren't labor laws outside of 3 miles away. But secondly, all the shrimping boats essentially had to shut down for that time period. And then, of course, Texas doesn't have a Navy, so they have no way to enforce what's happening off those outside the border anyway. But, it's one of those things that there is this sort of international water, I don't want to say loophole, but liberty area. And I guess, there are people who talk about it, the seasteading people and other people. There's a lot of liberty at ocean. And it's one of the reasons I think libertarians do have a love of the sea and what we can do out there. And so it's National Boat Safety Week. We talked a little tongue in cheek. A lot of libertarians seem to have accidents where they lose their guns out at sea, and it's unfortunate because they're unrecoverable, and there'll never be any transaction receipts with them ever again. It's a terrible, terrible thing to happen, but
it's heartbreaking. And one of these days, we're going to get the technology to go down there in the trench and get those guns back.
Right, right at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, because that's the thing about it too. We're also fascinated by the Mariana Trench, but then we lose them. And for the people who aren't familiar, I definitely recommend the special on life at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, because they're able to send unmanned craft down there, and there's an ecosystem of animals that live without sunlight, so they get their energy from geothermal and stuff like that. It's amazing.
There are critters down there that most people have never even seen images of. They look like what we envision for life on Jupiter or something,
Yeah, absolutely astonishing. And I hope that we're not disturbing them with all the guns that have been dropped down there. But I'm right, exactly. I don't even want to say it because I'm worried now somebody's going to have some ecological law. We heard libertarians are dumping guns in the Mariana Trench. Make some regulation. But that's all tongue in cheek. We would encourage you to please be as safe as possible when out on the water. Everybody should wear a personal flotation device. Sometimes they can be a hassle, but it's worth it. As Ken said, and I was aware of the statistic too, almost all the fatalities that happen at sea are people not wearing flotation devices. So it's such an easy thing to do. Please, no matter how great of a swimmer you are, how great of a boater you are, considering wearing your PFD all the time, take bad weather reports seriously. We showed you the example of typhoon smashing in an aircraft carrier. If your boat is smaller than an aircraft carrier, please consider taking the weather report seriously. And Anything else you want to add to Ken?
I would just say, as a guy who spent a lot of time at sea, and U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Navy, French Navy, German Navy, Dutch, Danish, Italian Navy, I've been on all kinds of ships. I'll tell you, the more time you spend at sea, the more you learn to respect the water. And I don't care if you're on Lake Havasu or where you are, respect the water and learn how to safely operate that boat of yours.
Yep.
Recognize that much as we love our herbal remedies and our beverages of choice, that somebody who is in full possession of their faculties needs to be operating the boat.
You know what? I'm going to tell two more stories now because you triggered me. First one is my sister also raced sailboats. We obviously grew up in the same place, and there's a big racing community there. And at one point in time, she was out racing and the boat capsized. And one of the things that they teach you when the boat capsizes is to take an extra life jacket, swim out to the top of the mast, and put the life jacket on there so that the mast won't go all the way under, what they call turtling, because that's a pain to right. And so she went out there and did that. And your racing partner is supposed to sit on the keel to keep the boat from going under. And so her partner had done that originally, but then lack of communication, whatever, she got off. And so while my sister was out there getting the life jacket on the mast, it went under and her foot got caught in a line. And so suddenly she is 20 feet underwater and she tries to swim up and she is struggling. And even though she has a life jacket in her hand, she's not pulling the boat up. And she said, I had this moment of clarity that if I didn't save myself, I was going to die. And she was able to reach down and calmly extract her foot and take her shoe out. And then the life jacket, she said, I actually didn't have any strength. The life jacket pulled me to the surface. And that's, one of those things that we talk about all the time, the importance of it. And then my quick story, this is for Joe Burns, if you're out there. I was out at Lake Buchanan in Texas when I was a teacher, and we used to take the kids out to the lake for a vacation. I was also a certified lifeguard, and we were out swimming just off the, right on the edge of the lake. And at one point I went out about 10 feet and I was diving down to the bottom just to, show the kids how you do the dive, and you put your feet up and it pushes you down. And I saw this giant log down there, and I went down there and I picked up this log and I brought it up and I look. And they're like, oh, that's cool. And I'm like, I'm going to do it again. And I went down, and I saw an even bigger log, and I went down there and I went to pick it up and I couldn't pick it up, and it had fishing line on it. And I managed to get my hand tangled in the fishing line. And as I'm trying to get up, and fortunately I remembered my sister's story of, and so early on, I'm like, you just don't try to swim away. Just take it off. And I got out of there. Good lesson. So even really experienced people can get in trouble. Take the sea seriously. Everything that Ken and I have to said. My name is Dan Fishman. This is the Liberty Lunch Power Hour. My guest is Ken Armstrong, former Libertarian presidential candidate, all around great guy. If you get a chance to meet Ken and his better half, Dawn, who's usually around with him, take the time, 5-minute conversation with Ken. You'll have a friend for life. He's a great guy. Ken, thanks so much for joining us here. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. You bet. And we'll be doing another Liberty Power Hour relatively soon. I meant to go full screen on me. We'll have Scott Horton on next week talking about his new book and how hopefully soon we're going to be ending the war in Afghanistan. My name is Dan Fishman. I'm the Executive Director of the People for Liberty, and this has been the Liberty Lunch Power